Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Little Big Town, titled Painkiller. Now, as I mentioned in the past, there's a considerable amount of time in the mid-2000s, starting around then, when I didn't listen to a lot of country music. Now, sure, I caught what was on the radio in the car, and I still appreciated the genre as a whole, but for the latter half of that decade, country music wasn't really on my mind, which is kind of a shame because there's a fair number of great country acts that released great albums in that period that I'm only catching up with now, and even some acts that debuted in that time. And one of the biggest acts to unfairly fall under my radar was Little Big Town. One of the more unique groups in modern country music. They consist of the female singers of Karen Fairchild and Kimberly Schlotman, and the male singers Jimmy Westbrook and Philip Sweet, and made their first big smash in the mainstream in 2006 with their second album, The Road to Here. Going back through that album, they remind me a lot of Lady Antebellum with their mid-tempo, adult alternative-inspired vibe, but that's where the similarities ended. For one, their harmonies were gorgeous and very well executed with a lot of layers, and they tend to have a more rollicking, folk-like edge to their instrumentation, even when it did sound very acoustic and very polished for modern country, which of course brought up a lot of comparisons to Fleetwood Mac, and yeah, it's kind of hard to miss here. From a melodic standpoint, the similarities get pretty stark, especially on that third album, A Place to Land. Unfortunately, their earlier career was fraught with a lot of label difficulties, as their label Equity Records went under, and Little Big Town was moved over to Capitol Nashville midway through releasing singles from that third album, which kind of handicapped their momentum. They pulled things together for The Reason Why in 2010, which injected some sharper texture and energy into their typical mid-tempo vibe, and surprise, surprise, it paid some pretty big dividends. They followed it up in 2012 with Tornado, which I really liked thanks to the rough edge production of longtime Eric Church producer Jay Joyce. But at that point, it was hard not to notice the shift in their songwriting and the increased number of writing credits that weren't from the band. Granted, they were still working with good songwriters, and let's be honest, lyrical flair was never my biggest focus when it came to Little Big Town, but it was a warning sign for me. And given that I was not a fan of their lead-off single Day Drinkin' or their collaboration with Miranda Lambert Smokin' and Drinkin' that showed up on her last album, Platinum, I gotta admit, I was a little bit uneasy here. Yeah, they were working with Jay Joyce again, but Jay Joyce also made Eric Church's The Outsiders a year, and that was a catastrophe. And let's be honest, Little Big Town are 6 albums into their career, and country music as a genre is in a weird transitory place right now. So what did this mean for Little Big Town's newest album, Painkiller? Well, just as country music is in a weird transitory place, Painkiller is also a weird album. But weird in the sense that it's halfway between the cacophonous insanity of Fleetwood Mac's Tusk and Eric Church's The Outsiders. It's an album that comes straight out of left field for country music and represents a significant departure in sound from the more restrained adult contemporary inspired work of their previous albums. In other words, while I don't think this album completely works, I'll get to why, although most listeners will be able to pinpoint it instantly, it's still a fascinating listen and an album that I honestly wish I liked a lot more than I do. I like it when country gets weird and experimental, and while this album is definitely better than Eric Church's attempt to fuse progressive metal with country, I'm still not quite certain Painkiller by Little Big Town completely works. So okay, for a change of pace, let's start with the least important and least interesting element on this album: the lyrics. Now, let's be blunt here. Lyrics have never been the biggest focus of Little Big Town. And to be fair, they've been able to get away with that for a while thanks to killer harmonies and some solid melody lines. And arguably, they kind of get away with it here too. It helps that the lyrics are rarely badly written, just a little bit bland at points, revisiting metaphors and imagery that aren't exactly revolutionary. It doesn't help matters that some of the songs just feel a little bit unfinished and could have used a little bit more stronger songwriting to better sketch the pictures. It also means that if this album has a theme, it's loosely defined at best, in this case being a series of troubled relationships, like we haven't seen that enough in country music. But what I did like on this album was the framing, which does a lot to show all the characters in said troubled relationships as deserving of the natural states of friction they're running into. Indeed, that's probably the closest thing to a real message you get on this album, that the natural state of love is conflict. Be they the back and forth of quit breaking up with me, to the over-the-top drama of Faster Gun, to the complicated aching pain of Girl Crush, to the thick air of contempt upon the breakup on things you don't think about. And while love might be that painkiller for a time, it's a temporary opiate that has all sorts of side effects, from the unease of tumble and fall to the eternal instability of live forever, even if it's well executed there. But you know what, let's be blunt, this isn't revolutionary songwriting, especially for country music. But on the other hand, I didn't mind the simpler themes here, even if I did find songs like Day Drinkin' to be a little bit uninspired and kind of weak. It's a necessary foundation though for the rest of this album, which very quickly goes into all sorts of weirdness that you would never have expected from this band. Now, the other essential part of that foundation is the harmonies, which are thankfully still really quite strong. I will say say right out of the gate that while I get the label's desire to push Karen Fairchild as the front woman and face of the group, I've never been the biggest fan of her vocals in comparison with the rest of them. And I do prefer it when the group is a little bit more evenly balanced, or at least gives the rest of the band more time in the real spotlight. And I feel obliged to say that despite how good some of the harmonies are on this album, and they are good, I'm a little bit baffled why there isn't more interplay between the members of the band playing distinctive roles in the songwriting. Girl Crush is the easiest example. A song where Fairchild wants to step into the position of the woman who is cheating with her man, almost to a point where she's almost fantasizing about this girl. And yet, we never get a verse from, say, Schlotman playing that woman. It could have added more angles to the songwriting, and just like with Lady Antebellum, I'm a little baffled why they never take advantage of that possibility. It could have made for a more compelling song, at least for me. Now, granted, in this case, they probably didn't do it because of the instrumentation, and really, I don't even know where to start here. I made the comparison to Fleetwood Mac's Tusk earlier, and while this album doesn't quite have the lunacy of that release from the late 70s, there are more than your fair share of odd, twisted moments that you would not have expected from a band like Little Big Town. The marching band and whistles of day drinking that inflates a pretty lightweight song, all things considered, to this heavy, stomping track. The uneasy guitar interplay on Tumble and Fall that had some great intensity, and the organ creeping in the back half, the reggae elements of the title track that would have been pretty tolerable with a guitar tone that didn't sound so painfully nasal, or the very oily drip of Girl Crush that reminded me more of Unchained Melody by the Righteous Brothers with a hint of gospel, which was a pretty weird choice for the song's subject matter. And from there it gets even more off kilter. Some pretty mixed results. The snarled, fluttering guitars and grime of Faster Gun that's trying to evoke a Western vibe, the theatrical vibe of Good People and Stay All Night, complete with horns that remind me more of mid-90s Reba McEntire than anything else, or the outright pop rock riff and Imagine Dragons inspired drum progression of Save Your Sin. And that's before we get songs like Things You Don't Think About, the reverb swollen booming track with some great smoldering guitar leads I really liked, or Turn the Lights On, probably the most outwardly Tusk-like song with its incredibly textured and expansive mix with a pummeling groove that builds up incredibly well with an instrumental crescendo that features hand clap percussion and a beat change up that probably would have worked a little bit better in concept than it does on record. All this feels like a record that is crammed to the brim with instrumental ideas and flourishes, most of which seem to be designed to add as much gravity and cacophonous presence as they possibly can to this album. And you know what? The incredibly frustrating part is that huge tracks of it just don't work, mostly thanks to the production being incredibly inconsistent. I made the comparisons with Eric Church's Outsiders earlier, and many of the same problems that afflicted that disaster crop up here, courtesy of the same producer, Jay Joyce. The most notable is the vocal production, which should never sound this heavy or reverb saturated when you're trying to work with vocal and harmonic arrangements, as it strips away some of the subtleties in those harmonies. But subtle may as well be a foreign word on this album, as it isn't just the percussion that's crammed to the front of the mix, it's everything. And while he does let some of the sounds fill out into a wall of sound technique, there's no cohesive sense of dynamics here. It very much feels like Joyce is trying to force the production to a certain sound instead of letting the instrumentation create it naturally or choosing the right guitar tones. And thus you get bizarre choices on this album that completely don't work, like burying the guitar tone at the back of the solo on Quit Breaking Up With Me, turning Day Drinking and the title track into these heavy, lumbering songs and saturating them with reverb to make them feel lighter instead of just letting them rely on acoustic instrumentation, turning Faster Gun into this icy track with gurgling guitar tones. None of that has the real fire of a solid Western song. It's not really highlighting the harmonies or the guitar-driven melodies in any sort of flattering way. Instead of lending them warmth or letting them develop any rollicking power on their own, they become these forced elephantine behemoths that definitely don't match some of the more light-rate songwriting topics. And you know what? The infuriating thing is that Jay Joyce is capable of more restrained production that does highlight the harmonies properly. Silver and Gold and Live Forever both have textured acoustic guitar work and a beautifully expansive mix, and are easily some of the best songs on the album that I really did enjoy. It's just a damn shame that such restraint doesn't materialize pretty much anywhere else on this album. So you know what? At the end of the day, believe it or not, I wanted to like this album. Hell, as much as Eric Church's The Outsiders didn't work, I want that record to succeed too. As I said, I like experimentation in country music. Look at Sturgill Simpson's Meta-Modern Sounds in Country Music, one of my favorite albums of this year. But the problem here is in execution, and while Little Big Town has more control and the simpler subject matter does guarantee some extremely solid songs that does redeem this album should have been better. For me, honestly, okay, it has grown on me a fair bit after repeated listens, and I do appreciate that more of the experimentation manages to stick the landing. But I'm still falling on a 6 out of 10 here and a tentative recommendation. You might not have gotten a second tusk with Painkiller by Little Big Town, but it definitely is a fascinating listen, and while I'm not one to reward experimentation for its own sake, it's definitely an interesting direction for the band to take, so yeah, I'm interested in whatever they're gonna follow this with, let me say that. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. If you'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. What did you guys think of the production of this album? Did it work for you? I know it's working for a lot of critics, but it's not clicking for me. So leave your comments. I'm kind of curious what you have to say on that. If there's anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation, or any other albums coming out that you want me to take a look at, I'd be more than happy to give them a listen. Until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.